This is Randy Moss. You might know him as the greatest receiver in the history of the New England Patriots, or maybe even one of the greatest wide receivers of all time. But although most people remember him for his days in the NFL, most people don't know just how great Randy Moss was in college. Over the course of a couple years, Randy was able to build up his reputation as one of the best receivers in all of college football. And eventually it became clear that this man had everything it took to one day become a legend. So today I am putting Randy Moss into College Football 25. Let's take a look back on how he became one of the greatest receivers of all time, as we follow him on his road to glory. Now, coming out of high school, Randy Moss was one of the top athletes in the country. I mean, he had already established himself as one of the greatest athletes to ever come out of the state of West Virginia. So obviously he was receiving a ton of attention from around the country as far as his recruiting, and he had plenty of offers to eventually choose from. The main schools that he wanted to go to, though, were Notre Dame and Ohio State, because his half-brother Eric Moss actually played left guard there. But ultimately, when it came to his college decision, Randy Moss decided to sign his letter of intent with Notre Dame. And I'll tell you guys what, man, Randy Moss was excited to play for the Fighting Irish, but it's too bad that he never would. After it turns out that Randy Moss was getting a little bit of trouble after seeing some dude get in a fight with his friend. So eventually Randy felt like he had to step in and beat the brakes off of somebody. But ultimately that just landed a high school Randy Moss in jail, and now Notre Dame wanted nothing to do with him. So Randy Moss had to go out there and try to find a new college to go to, and ultimately he decided to sign with Florida State. And now Randy was ready to move on from high school and make some noise for the Seminoles. Unfortunately though, before he even got there, he was making the wrong type of noise. As it turns out that Randy Moss got caught smoking that Mary Jane, that loud pack, if you know what I mean. And sadly, this would land Randy Moss right back in jail, where now once again Florida State wanted nothing to do with him, and he had to transfer out already to find his third college team. But now with many of the big schools wanting absolutely nothing to do with Randy Moss, he decided to go back home to the state of West Virginia, and for his final college decision, he decided to sign with Marshall University. Now, as soon as Randy Moss got to Marshall University as a 5-star receiver, he was obviously already going to get the chance to move up the depth chart. And it actually didn't take long until the very first practice for the coaches to clearly see that Randy was the best player on the roster. And the coaches pretty much already wanted him to be the starter going into the first week. But they were going to slowly ease him out there as he was heading into his first game of his college football career against the UGF Pandas. Now, unfortunately, Randy didn't get to play in this game until later on in the fourth quarter, where this game was still tied at 0. Both of these offenses seem to be absolutely atrocious, but now one of them is making use of Randy Moss, who, although made a big play in the fourth quarter, the coaches decided to take him out the game. But the coaches would bring him back in overtime, where Randy was determined to make a play, as he ended up catching this ball over the middle and easily getting in the end zone for a touchdown. He had literally only been in the game for a couple plays, but already he did enough to help his team come away with their first win of the season. Marshall closes this one out with a 6-3 victory, and it seems like everybody's realized that they found a new star player for the team, because it wasn't long before the entire campus was talking about Randy, and it seemed like it was for good reason, because throughout his freshman year, Randy Moss was absolutely balling. It seemed like every single game he was out there scoring a touchdown, and if not, he was still out there helping his team come away with some victories. But it wasn't just all on Randy Moss though, as they had a great quarterback, Chad Pennington, who many people believe had a chance to eventually go to the NFL. And with Marshall at the time playing in Division I AA, otherwise known as the FCS, this Pennington to Moss connection just could not be stopped. And now it became evidently more and more clear as Marshall kept racking up the wins, and the whole time Randy Moss felt like he had a long way to go from reaching his potential. But by the end of his freshman year, Randy led his team to a perfect record, along with winning a bowl game in a season where Randy had established himself as one of the best receivers in the nation. Some people had their doubts, but it was hard to deny when Randy had scored 28 touchdowns in the season, breaking the all-time single-season record for most scores for a non-quarterback. But with Marshall University now officially looking to move up to the FBS, this brings us to Randy Moss's sophomore season, and he is looking to prove that he is still the best receiver in the nation. Because there's a lot of people who think that he could start struggling now that he's playing against better competition. But now going into the regular season, Randy couldn't wait to show them otherwise, as Marshall is heading into their first game of the 1997 season against the Army. Now in this one early on, this Marshall offense was moving pretty well even when not throwing to Randy Moss. Randy would still get his touches here throughout the first quarter, but the Army was still out here playing some pretty good defense. They got to a third down where they were damn near locking up Randy Moss, and pretty much the entire offense as a whole. It would not be till the third quarter where Randy would start getting this offense moving a little bit, but they were still barely able to even get past the 50. Now this game would eventually go into overtime where Marshall would find themselves running on third down, and many of the fans felt like that was a pretty stupid play call because ultimately this would cost Marshall their first game of the season, as they end up getting beat by the Army 6-0. And Randy definitely felt somewhat responsible considering that he didn't have a great game. But he knew that eventually he and Chad Pennington would get their connection back to what it was the previous season. But he was hoping that they would be able to get it back sooner rather than later, as Marshall was now heading into their second game at home, where this time they would be matched up against Old Dominion. Now early on in this one, Randy Moss was pretty much being force-fed the ball. Likely for good reason though, as Randy was out there cooking up these defenders and finding himself wide open early for a touchdown. He and Chad Pennington were finally able to connect on their first score since the previous season. But it turns out that these two were only just getting started, because it wasn't too long after where Randy would hit the cornerback with a little huss, getting himself wide open on the outside for another touchdown, coming up with his second one of the day here in the second quarter, which eventually would lead us to the third quarter where he came up with his third score, putting his team up by now 28 points on the day. And by now, Randy had already helped his team come up with the first win on their season, as Marshall University proves that they are capable of dominating teams at the FBS level. But even more important for Randy Moss, he was proving that he could dominate, as he came up with 12 receptions for 240 yards and 3 touchdowns, earning himself National Offensive Player of the Week in the process. And at this point, Randy Moss was starting to become a household name in the college football world. But he knew he had to stay consistent and really show the country what he can do. And he would have another chance to do so as he was heading into another game now on the road, where it looks like now Marshall was set to face off against Middle Tennessee. Early on in this one, it was clear that Randy Moss was not messing around. On one of the first plays of the game, the quarterback threw the ball up to him, and Randy Moss decided to say "Rain," snagging his ball out the air even though he was smothered in coverage. And from there, the defense knew that they might be in for a long day. Middle Tennessee was so concerned about Randy that they were flying safeties down before he could really even do anything, and it just left his teammates wide open over the top, as another player was able to get downfield and score a touchdown to extend their lead. And it was becoming pretty obvious that this team was not equipped to face what they were dealing with, because later on, even when safeties were trying to shade over to Randy's side, he would still get open over the top, catching the ball on the sideline where he was able to glide past the defense and come up with his second touchdown of the game. A huge play that extended the Marshall lead that they would maintain until the fourth quarter. We're now down at the red zone. They come to a play where Chad decides to throw the ball up to Randy, and in double coverage, he snacks this ball out the air. Randy Moss had once again dominated his competition, and he was able to lead his team to another victory on the season, as Marshall beat Middle Tennessee 27-11. And with the way Randy been playing, man, you could damn near see him on TV every week. One show even made up a whole segment just for him.
Concentration, way to come back for your quarterback, young man. You got Moss.
But now with Marshall sitting at 2-1 on the season, they knew they had a lot more work to do if they wanted to eventually compete in a bowl game. And if they wanted any chance to make one, they knew that they had to keep things rolling going into the next game. And against one of the worst teams on their schedule, it didn't surprise anyone that Randy Moss would go out there and dominate this team. Man absolutely obliterated some poor fella's ankles on the way to the end zone for a touchdown. This would actually be his fourth one of the day, coming up big in a game where he helped his team secure their third win of the season. Just absolutely curb stomping this random FCS team, beating them 42-0 with the help of another Randy Moss 200+ yard game. And as he earned himself another National Offensive Player of the Week, many people were now very high on Randy Moss. People started to see the potential in this kid as he was clearly the best receiver in the nation. But there were still many doubts that Randy would be able to carry his team at this level. But Randy Moss was looking to prove that he was more than capable of doing so. He would just have to keep playing at a high level as Marshall was now heading on the road to now face off against Appalachian State. In this one, Randy Moss was getting his touches early, coming up with plays that resulted in first downs. But it wouldn't be until the second quarter on a 3rd and 10, where Randy would come up with his first touchdown, putting up a score that gives Marshall the 7-0 lead before Appalachian State ties it up. And with it still being 7-7 late in the third quarter, Randy knew he had to come up with some big plays like this one. So y'all might not even have noticed it there, but he actually tipped the ball to his teammate, and they were able to come up with a first down. See, that's some high-level plays from Randy Moss. It's too bad that in the fourth quarter, his quarterback was not on the same page, as he ends up throwing an interception, and even Randy Moss cannot catch the DB. It makes it all the way to the end zone for a touchdown to give Appalachian State the lead, bringing us towards the end of the fourth quarter where things are not looking good for Marshall. I mean, despite the fact that Randy is wide open, the quarterback is just not seeing him. bringing us to a 4th and 4 where this pass ends up falling incomplete. And now all of a sudden Marshall is taking their second loss of the year, dropping this one 14-17 to Appalachian State. But despite the loss, Randy Moss played pretty well, going for 180 yards and a touchdown, but unfortunately it wasn't enough to keep his team's win streak alive. So Randy knew that it was now time for him to get back to work and do whatever it takes to get his team a chance to play in a bowl game. And in order to do that, he just had to lock back in and play even better going into their next game against Miami of Ohio. And with Randy Moss having worked on his top speed lately, he was absolutely cooking these DBs in this game. This man Randy was able to zoom past the entire defense on one of his first offensive possessions, coming up with a catch and run that went for a touchdown to make this game 7-0, giving his team a ton of momentum going forward that they would take into their next possession and beyond. Because in this game, it seemed like Miami University could do nothing against Randy, as he was actually out there jumping over dudes and making them look goofy. This man Randy was different, and that's why he would actually help them come up with another win on the season, just absolutely mopping the floor with Miami University 35-3. This Marshall team truly believed that they had potential to achieve some greatness, and with that Chad Pennington to Randy Moss connection looking like it was back for good, it didn't seem like anybody had any chance to put a stop to this offense. A lot of defense actually got to a point where they just stopped guarding Randy altogether, leaving him wide open and hoping that a safety could make a tackle, but against James Madison, well, that was clearly not the case. He actually ended up breaking off a couple tackles on this play and going all the way towards the end zone. He damn near threw this one dude to Madagascar on this play that ultimately led Marshall to another victory on the season, closing this one out 17-0, and that was thanks to another 200-yard game from Randy Moss. And his dominance would continue throughout the season with Chad Pennington throwing him the ball, because oftentimes he was out there able to say, "Wang," and come up with some big plays like this one where he was mossing the defense and easily making his way towards the end zone for a score. Randy looked like he was doing everything he could to help his team keep winning more and more games as the season rolled on. The craziest part about it is that he was still nowhere near as good as he felt like he could one day be. And it was too bad for a lot of teams that remained on Marshall's schedule, because they unfortunately would be the ones to find out, as Randy Moss throughout the season showed that he had the ability to run pretty much any route and find himself open for a touchdown, coming up with one here against UL Monroe where he helped them win another game on the year, closing this one out 14-0 before heading into Marshall's final game of the regular season, where it looks like Marshall will be matched up against Arkansas State, and it also looks like Randy Moss is still locked in, because early on in this one he actually decides to come out here and say, "Wang," coming up with a huge catch and run, and soon he was gliding his way towards the end zone for another score on his season. Randy Moss had continued to dominate, and just like that, he was officially helping his team put an end to the regular season, as Marshall ends up closing this one out 14-7, and Randy Moss would close the season out with his 10th player of the game. But with Marshall now being 10-2 on the season so far, although they were not undefeated, they still did get a chance to play in their conference championship game, where it turns out that they would get home field advantage in a game that turns out to be the biggest game in their school history. Many people had forgotten that this was their first year in the FBS, and already they were looking like one of the top teams in the nation, and they had a chance to achieve their first conference championship if they could win their next game against Southern Mississippi. Now, early on in this one, it was more of the same from Randy Moss that we had seen from him all season. He was out there finding space in the open zones as he was able to come up with the catch and make his way down the sideline to start this game off, coming up with a score that gave his team the 7-0 lead before Southern Miss came right back, not only putting this game at 7-7, but they would actually come out here and get a pick on the following drive. Now in the second quarter of this one, Randy Moss was out there making plays all over the field. Still though, Marshall would be brought to a third down where they tried to come up with a big play, eventually deciding to chuck it deep downfield to Randy Moss, and it turns out Randy would come up with a catch, snagging this ball out the air for a touchdown before halftime. A big play that gave his team the lead before they were now going into the third quarter, where on this third down and 14, it seems like they were also now struggling, where it seems like Randy Moss and Chad Pennington are just not on the same page, and this would continue even into the fourth. They were continuously not able to capitalize on third down, but still somehow maintain the lead, ultimately bringing us to another third down where Marshall had the chance to put this game away. And with Randy Moss knowing they're about to run commit, he gets past the defender, comes up with the catch past the first down marker, and gets down to the ground. Because Randy Moss knows that with this play, he helped his team come up with their first conference championship, winning this game 27-24. And a big factor in this victory would in fact be Randy Moss, who went for 10 receptions and 289 yards with 3 touchdowns, actually breaking the record for the most receiving yards in a game in Marshall history. But now, after helping Marshall win a conference championship, many people felt like he should win the Heisman, but instead it would actually go to Charles Woodson out of Michigan. Regardless, though, Randy Moss would clearly establish himself as the best receiver in all of college football, winning many rightfully deserved awards after having an incredible college season. But he was excited to know that he was still not done playing yet, as he now had a chance to play in a bowl game. So after working on a few more of his skills, Randy felt like he was ready to go into what could be his final game of his college football career. And it looks like it might actually be one of his toughest games of his career, as he's about to play one of the best teams in all of the nation, with Marshall having to face off next against the Miami Hurricanes. Now, early on in this one, Marshall is getting Randy involved with a screen pass, where on this play he said, "Hey," joking out half the defense, and he was able to make his way upfield before diving across the goal line for a touchdown, coming up with an early score to make this now a 7-0 game against the best competition they faced. But unsurprisingly, Miami would eventually tie this game up. And on their next defensive possession, it seems like they did more than that, as they came out here and got a pick, not only putting an end to Marshall's offensive drive, but allowing himself the chance to now take the lead. And now Randy Moss knew he had to come out here and try to make something happen. So on this play, Chad Pennington zoomed this ball downfield, where it was caught by Randy Moss. And somehow Randy is able to escape this entire defense before getting upfield for his second touchdown of the game. And Randy almost couldn't even believe what he was doing, man. He was playing one of the best teams that he's seen his entire life. But he definitely believed it more after he saw them take the lead back. But then all of a sudden it seemed like Marshall wasn't able to get anything going on offense. They just continuously got the third downs where that Miami defense would come up with another stop. But luckily by the end of this one, Miami did still leave Marshall a chance to win the game. They had a couple plays left to potentially get it towards, one more play left to potentially get it towards the end zone. And if this play was going to go to anybody, it was going to go to Randy Moss. So on this play, Randy Moss ran downfield and broke towards the middle of the field. And now Chad Pennington decided to take the shot. This ball hung up in the air for a little bit before it was caught by Randy. He had come up with a huge play in this game, but there was no time left. And unfortunately, Marshall would lose their final game of the season, finishing this one 20-14. But after a year where Marshall had a great first season in the FBS, and after a career where Randy Moss was the leading receiver in the country, not only established himself as one of the best in his era, but one of the best receivers in all of college football history, Randy Moss knows that it is finally time to move on from college, where he will now pursue his journey to become an NFL legend. But this was Randy Moss in College Football 25. If you want to see more videos like this, be sure to get this one to 1,000 likes and subscribe to the channel down below. Also, be sure to comment down below who else you guys want to see next, and YouTube thinks you'll like one of these other stories until the next one comes out. If you got to this point in the video, just know that I appreciate you more than you'll ever know. I hope you all have a great rest of your week, and other than that, I'm going to catch you guys next time.